Okay, everybody, thank you for coming to class. We have a real treat today. We have Ted Smith coming to talk a bit about, not a bit, but a lot about cannabis. And I can see that Ted has gone the extra mile to bring quite a lot of things for us to look at. So I think it'll be really, really great. So please help me welcome Ted Smith.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, for having me here. This is truly a big honor for me. And thank you to my friend Owen, who's one of the students in the class here who helped connect me with Mike to get me here. You hear me mention Owen a few times today. And in fact, he's excluded from this first question because I wanted to start out by just kind of asking you guys a question, which is, how many of you know that we have, or that is humans have an endocannabinoid system? Oh, there's a few out there. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I'm probably going to start today's little lecture a little different than what you've seen before, because I want you to all know a little bit about cannabis and what cannabis is and THC before we begin, because we all are using THC right now in our bodies. Every vertebrate animal is. In our nervous system. We don't call it THC, though. We call it anandamide. It's identical, but we just call it something different because one we produce internally, one is produced externally in a plant. It goes back 500 million years ago was when we first created this chemical to help us calm our nerves down. That's actually what it does in our bodies. It's one of the reasons it's so good medically, because it just calms us down both physically and emotionally. There's a lot of other mechanisms that happen when you use cannabis as medicine. I'll probably get into some of them later. But 500 years ago, the cannabis plant and us were essentially the same species. But we split up, and some of us turned into animals walking around and some into plants. But we all used the same chemicals, the same terpenes even, that have developed over time. And it's been fascinating to study this plant. And honestly, we don't know much about 500 million years ago. Hell, we don't know much about 500 years ago even. But certainly, we have developed over time an intense relationship with this plant. And over time, we've learned to use it as food. The seed that cannabis plants grow contains all essential fatty acids and amino acids that you need to survive. It's got all the proteins. It's one of the healthiest foods on the planet. The fiber itself is one of the strongest things that's out there in terms of the plant life anyway. So we were starting to make mats out of it and fibers and ropes going back eons, certainly as medicine as well. We were using the plant, eating it, and later, much later, smoking it. But it certainly was a vital part of our development, which is why you can see the endocannabinoid system is really built to use this plant. And so, the story of cannabis and drugs hasn't really been written very well yet. I have a few old books here that go back a little bit, but cannabis and drug use and prohibition didn't start last century like some people start. Drug use was ancient. We were using mushrooms and every other plant and any other means to sort of enhance our spiritual development or have out-of-body experiences. So, a couple thousand years ago, there was really in the known world this plethora of different religions and cultures that were doing all sorts of drugs and, dancing and meditating and drumming and, anything and everything they could do to alter their perception. And then came the Catholic Church. And so, for various reasons, I should be going through my slideshow. Sorry, I'm not used to doing slideshows. Sorry. So, so there's anandamide and just some of the different uses that we've had historically, and now we can use it for so much more. I'll get into a bit of that later. But yeah, the Catholic Church formed, like 325, but it was like 387 when they really came down hard on all other religions within the Roman Empire. And so that was really the beginning of prohibition. It wasn't just a prohibition of cannabis, which was used in the incense in all the temples at the time. It was used in the anointing oil that Jesus shared. It was fairly commonly used, but it wasn't the strongest plant drug, that's for sure. But it was among the plants and drugs that were just prohibited in a very sweeping way by the Catholic Church when their new regime came in. And that was really the beginning of the drug war as we see it now. And certainly, there's a picture of the witch hunts. They were really an extension of that, because when the Catholic Church took over in Western society, God healed you from then on in. Not these plants, not the whatever else you're pulling from your devil medicines. It's God that heals you, or you're going to die. That was kind of the way it was for a long time there through the Dark Ages. And so the witch hunts were really just an extension of that. And so, when we were, or when Christians sort of identified with, losing the Garden of Eden, part of that was they lost access to the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, mushrooms and cannabis and all these plants that you use to achieve knowledge, they considered that they were more sophisticated than that. They were more evolved than that their religion was better than that. They didn't need those things. They could have direct access to God through prayer, and that was enough. The rest of you were just wasting your time with all these other things, was a theory. So, we were no longer in that Garden of Eden where we're living with the animals, just eating mushrooms. Now we have this higher state of being that can heal through prayer. And so, when Prohibition, started to come around, at the beginning of the 19th century, a lot of that was this real Christian abstinence sort of ideology, right? That drugs are done by bad people, by devil worshippers, by other people that worship other gods and goddesses, or have no gods or goddesses. That certainly a good Christian would never use drugs. Maybe alcohol seems to be okay, but certainly, when it came to anything that may enlighten a person, that's not allowed, right? And so, and then, and I'm sure you've learned a little bit about the opium war and the racism that happened there. I'm not going to go over that, but that was certainly one of the reasons why, the Western society was so keen to prohibit opium, because it fit their, ancient ideology of the pure Christians. And so a funny thing happened, though, along the way. So in the 1800s, hemp was used everywhere, in the United States for rope and all sorts of things. But in 1916, excuse me, an invention was made, or two different inventions. One that could turn the pulp in the plant. So there's this stalk that the plant grows in, and it's got the fiber on the outside, and in the middle this cork. Well, the cork until 1916 was pretty much waste material. You'd throw it in the barn to soak up animal waste, but it wasn't much more than that. All of a sudden they could turn that into paper. Well, that was way more valuable than just throwing stuff away. Secondly, invention was made to go into the field and cut the plant down and separate the fiber from the cork in the field, with very little effort. Before that, historically in the 1800s, it took a lot of effort to harvest hemp. And while it was used a lot, it was tough fiber. It was tough on machinery. This decorticator changed everything. They both came out the same year. A little bit of press came out about it. Well, who do you think found out about that? Well, the press. What did the press just heavily invest into? Timber rights, so that they could cut down big trees to make into paper for their newspapers. So they just bought all that timber right. So they didn't really want a plant being grown by farmers to take over that. But there's a lot of other, industries involved there too, right? A lot of chemicals involved in paper production, newsprint and stuff. To break down trees, you don't need a fraction of that to make hemp paper, by the way. But certainly at the time, we had these fledgling chemical companies, newspaper companies. So, they were talking about this, competition, right? Because, we're all trying to make a buck here. And in some ways, this might seem like a theory or a conspiracy, but in other ways, this is almost just practical economics of eliminating the competition. So the one that, people don't really know about, the individual, is this guy here, Andrew Mellon, richest man in America in the 1920s. he helped develop like Gulf, Gulf Oil, Bank of America, I think JW Pharmaceuticals, Dow Chemicals, General Motors, like these big companies were just getting off the ground, and these Western industrialists were, wanting to take control and make money. And so this guy here, became the Secretary Treasurer of the United States. So he controlled all the money, and him and a few others like William Hearst came up with the term marijuana, blamed black people for raping women under its use, and Mexicans, and came up with this complete smear campaign against cannabis, marijuana. Meanwhile, hemp was their main target. They eliminated it from the Navy, from schools, from the economy as much as they possibly could, stopped investing in it in any way. And so by the time it became illegal in 1937, the Reefer Madness campaign had settled in very well. The only groups that opposed it were the American Poultry Association, because their birds lived on hemp seed and they couldn't imagine chicken eggs without that. And the American Medical Association, who for one said that there's no other option for glaucoma patients. Like, we don't have any other medicines at all. They're just going to go blind without this now, thanks, let alone the other medicines they were making from it. But it was too late by then. It wasn't even, like I say, the pharmaceutical companies pushing it. It was all these other big industrial companies that were behind the prohibition of hemp. So none of that was really known for a long time. Oh yeah, sorry. And then there's Harry Anslinger. So this guy, when he was Secretary Treasurer, created a whole department in the United States. First, they went after alcohol, right? There's this brief time where they were trying to prohibit alcohol with the abstinence movement and all that stuff. Well, that failed bitterly. So he went and got his nephew, Harry Anslinger, to switch from that department over to the Department of Narcotics, is what it eventually became. And so that was the beginning of the enforcement. They were going after black people, poor black people, jazz. A lot of black people used cannabis. They had used it in a lot of cases while they were slaves even. They were allowed to use cannabis on the plantations. They weren't allowed to drink alcohol or do anything else, but they seemed to be able to smoke and use cannabis freely and easily. It didn't affect their work, probably made them healthier and happier workers, for crying out loud, which is one reason why, and probably the only reason why the slavery owners would have put up with it. But they really resented black people for using cannabis once they became free. And so this was a great excuse to go into any poor person's house, pretty much, and you'd find some marijuana somewhere and be able to, do any number of things that you wanted to, or search their cars, or just search them while they're walking around. And so, and ironically enough, Harry Anslinger was his nephew. Mellon didn't want him in his family business because he thought he was too much of a jerk. So anyway, the Department of Narcotics, really, made these policies happen around the world, and pushed them through the United Nations on, all sorts of other countries. Canada, though, they didn't have to push too hard here. We got a pretty right-wing sort of white government here at times, and so as soon as the newspapers and rich people found out about this, Emily Murphy, a woman here, wrote an article in Maclean's magazine. That was really popular. We made it here illegal in 1923, 14 years before the United States did, because they're a little bit more democratic than we were at the time. The rich people here just slipped the law through before we even knew what was happening. But they weren't really enforcing it right away. It was years before they started enforcing it on any kind of a mass scale. In fact, it wasn't really until things started to change in the 60s that much enforcement started to happen. And so the 60s were this magical time where people were not only sort of rediscovering cannabis, but all sorts of other drugs were coming out there, LSD, ecstasy, or MDMA as it was known at the time, other experimental drugs. And it was a really interesting and exciting time for a lot of folks. Cannabis wasn't the most powerful. There was no industry behind it. It was really, a very different life than any of us will ever experience. But certainly, one of the main themes at the time was, you may have heard, tune in, turn on, drop out. And so instead of change the world, these hippies were just like, fuck the world, drop out of it, it's done. The wars in Vietnam was going on. There's, a lot of things happening. And so it was a time of rebellion that was really part of what led Richard Nixon to reinvigorate the war on drugs and really, coin the term in 1971. He came up with a fresh wave of enforcement right at a time when it looked like things were going to ease up. There weren't really any reasons to do that aside from good publicity. And so, in the 1970s, a few people started to dive into the history of cannabis more and where it came from and why it was made illegal. And by far, the most known and the most celebrated and most successful of these is Jack Hare, the gentleman at the end there. Jack wrote this book called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. This is the book that exposed the sort of reefer madness conspiracy that I talked about. And it really is fascinating, all the things that have gone on in just with hemp alone, both historically and through prohibition. For example, after reefer madness, first set in after 1937, we had the Second World War. Well, turns out there's no better material to make parachutes and rope than hemp. And so there was a brief period in the 1940s where we had a campaign called Hemp for Victory, where the United States government was trying to get farmers to grow hemp again. And George Bush Sr. apparently, took a parachute that was made out of hemp in the war because it was such a useful, strong material. And so, yeah, Jack, went around to all these conferences and stuff with these handouts and doing research and fighting against prohibition. But eventually, in the 1980s, came out with this, much celebrated book that really opened up a lot of people's eyes to the history of this plant and all of its uses. And so, which include things like, this is hemp insulation. It's actually made in Nepal. I got some other ones that made in Alberta as well. But yeah, we could be making all sorts of building materials. Sure, yeah. Yeah, it's not toxic, so you can hug it. I hug it all the time. Usually I stand and talk with it. And then I'll pass this around too. This is hemp plywood from China. So it's very durable, very light. And I actually stained that with a hemp stain that was made in the United States. So Jack was the one who really started to let us know about hemp seed and all these potential uses of cannabis that, this entire suit that I'm wearing, except my tie, I couldn't find my hemp tie today, is made out of hemp, for example. There's just so many things that hemp could be useful for, let alone our health. Yeah. The hat's not hemp too, is it? Oh my God, I forget to say that. Okay. No. Oh wow, I forgot that the hat was too. Cool. Okay, I'm spoiled. Okay, so Jack is getting his thing going on, and then but there's still this raging war on drugs through the 80s, right? Like that's when I kind of started to use this plant, and you had to be pretty careful. But the quality of the cannabis, honestly, wasn't that great. Like when I grew up in the 80s in Ontario, we smoked hash. We didn't smoke much pot at all, unless we had to. And then it was always full of seeds. We would often get like literally bricks of Mexican pot where they would squish it so tight that it would take a while to like pull it all apart to be able to smoke it, and be full of stalks and seeds. And it was not probably grown much in Canada in the 70s, with a few exceptions. I grew up in a small farm town in Ontario, and I remember in the 70s helicopters flying around every fall because apparently there were a couple of hippie communes nearby, and they'd always try and grow pot in the cornfields of the unsuspecting neighbors. And so, you'd never grow it in your backyard, but people go cut down corn plants and grow them out there. But it was really in the 80s that things changed in a lot of ways for cannabis, which is when indoor cultivation really started to kick in, and people started to first greenhouses, and then with artificial lights and in artificial sort of spaces, right? Like basements and garages and attics. And I've seen some pretty funny places people have ended up putting their plants. But, at times, whatever it took to do things without getting caught, for sure. And so, yeah, it was in the 80s that we really saw the beginning of any kind of an industry here in Canada. Before that, there was like import-export going on. I should introduce my love, Clea, at some point, because she has not only grown cannabis for 40 years now, but she was before that even one of our import-exports, or importer-exporters, bringing stuff in planes from other countries and such. And so, yeah, and if you want to read more or hear more of the stories, there's a movie, Kid Cannabis, that's a real life story. It was from the 90s of a couple kids from the United States that were smuggling pot from the Kootenays. And I'm not just saying watch it because I'm in it. It's a real life movie. It's cool. But yeah, so there's a lot of things happening through the 80s and the 90s of people that were starting to make a living and working in organized groups. Certainly the Hells Angels or organized crime as we know it got heavily involved. It was pretty lucrative. Cannabis was going for quite a bit of money at the time, and if you had things in order, you could make a good amount of money off of it. And so, there was a lot of people working outside of that, to be sure, but, there was definitely a push within the organized crime in British Columbia in particular to make money off of this. And that wasn't being done in any kind of a violent way. Typically they're very good business people. And so it was all about just making as much money as they could. But they were the ones that really pushed the development of fertilizers and lights and, the equipment to grow cannabis was driven by these, money-making enterprises. And so let me just see where I'm at with my time. Okay, moving right along. Yeah, and so in the 80s and 90s too, like there's some heavy enforcement actions. This wasn't happening without the police trying to fight back. This whole time, the war on drugs was raging, right? And so the BC government and other jurisdictions created like dedicated grow teams where their entire point was to shut down grow operations. The U.S. government was sending helicopters up here from their Navy and such to find grow ops up and down the coast. I know of one story, for example, where someone I know wrote an article in High Times magazine about pot being grown on Lasqueti Island. So that fall, the DEA targeted Lasqueti Island, and nobody got away with the plant that year. Those helicopters would like fly right up into people's backyards and flatten their entire garden, not just the pot plants that were there, but they, were really disruptive. They wanted people to know that they couldn't just hide from the authorities, and they were, sending like teams and teams of people. And in some ways, it'd be a cool job. It'd be like going around in a helicopter all day, cutting plants down. Like that's kind of fun. But honestly, it was a terror to the people that were here, and they barely arrested anybody doing them. Was part of the frustrating part was, by the time the helicopter got there, people were long gone. They just destroyed the plants and destroyed people's lives. But certainly, they did that for a very long time. And so the fact that people, fought back against that at all is really a miracle. And the fact that it even started in the United States is even more of a miracle, because the laws and the government of the United States, particularly the federal government, is pretty nasty. And so the movement here in Canada, the medical marijuana movement and the rest, really owes its pass and owes credit to the United States and activists down in the United States like Jack Herer, who were leading the way long before any of us up here decided to pick up the torch. And so certainly in California, and I'll speak more to it in the second half, but the San Francisco Cannabis Buyers Club began openly defying the law, and the state of California, and police in cities turned a blind eye. But at times the federal agents would come in, and whatever the state law was didn't matter to them. It's still federal law to them. And so, there was times where ballot initiatives would be passing. I think the 1997 Compassionate Act of California was like a really big one. But that didn't stop the police from coming in and still raiding people. But that didn't stop people from still coming back and opening and defying. And so, a lot of that, like I say, really goes back to the United States. Here in Canada, I started our club here in January '96. We just had our 30-year anniversary. About a year after that, the BC Compassion Club started in Vancouver. And for a few reasons, Hillary was very focused when she started that, had a lot of resources around her in the Vancouver scene that I didn't seem to have here. And I honestly was involved in a couple of other nonprofit work or groups as well. So this wasn't my complete focus. But certainly the BC Compassion Club in the 90s led the way here once they opened up. And things really broke in 1999. David Suzuki did a Nature of Things film on cannabis as medicine and the BC Compassion Club. And there's this one segment where they were interviewing a man. I think he had Parkinson's. And, when it started, he's, shaking pretty hard. And if you've ever seen a video of someone going from shaking really hard to being quite comfortable and being able to talk and roll their own joints and stuff after a couple tokes, it's pretty phenomenal. It's even more phenomenal to do it, honestly. It's very humbling. Makes you feel very thankful for the health that you have. But certainly, when you see that visually, it's hard to forget. Especially knowing how other medications have failed patients like that. So David Suzuki did this show, and everyone in Canada saw this one particular man in the video, and that changed a lot of things for a lot of people. And in the 90s, it was risky to open up compassion clubs. Luckily, though, for the most part, I think a combination of discretion of the police and just being really careful. While I expected to get busted, and most of us did, or did get busted, I guess, it wasn't something that, we were necessarily afraid of. And luckily, the authorities seemed to back off for the most part when clubs like these were opening. But there were really only a handful. There's one here in Victoria till '99, then there was two, one in Vancouver, like two in Toronto, one in Montreal, really till the turn of the century. And then it was around 2000, 2001 when court decisions like the Parker decision really started to change things and make medical marijuana legal, and we started to have a legal medical marijuana program. That really took a lot of steam out of the whole war on drugs, because suddenly people could get licenses to possess, they could get licenses to grow, they could get licenses to even basically transport pounds around on a plane. All sorts of things started to happen, and licenses to grow. So all of a sudden, people started to become aware of others that were growing, sometimes very openly, in ways that were a little bit disruptive to neighborhoods. But certainly, that really helped break the ice in terms of losing the general public's fear of cannabis and what it might do if it was unleashed upon our society. But it was slow, gaining entrance into the medical marijuana program. And that was when the Liberals were in charge under Jean Chrétien. When Stephen Harper took over, I can't remember exactly when that was, the Conservatives had a very negative approach to cannabis. So even though the medical marijuana program was evolving and there was court decisions striking down the law because it was inadequate in how it worked, Stephen Harper and the government were both resisting any efforts to improve the medical marijuana program, but also they were bringing in mandatory minimum sentences for any number of different aspects of growing and selling cannabis and other drugs too. Like they were trying to go after the whole war on drugs. It was really one of their themes, to be sure. And so, we were organizing at a certain point there national rallies against these mandatory minimums and stuff. Luckily, not many of them came in, although I think at the time Owen got arrested, there were some like 6-year mandatory minimums that were going on or something. So, they were very real, but the courts hadn't had them tested yet. Thankfully those mandatory minimums were never set in law. But they were being considered, that's for sure. There's a lot of growing activism on the street against both Stephen Harper and the cannabis laws, certainly both in the U.S. and Canada. Here, actually, before I started the Buyers Club, the first thing I did was actually create a group called, I didn't actually create it, I started it going to it in Vancouver and then moved here, called Hempology 101. I moved here 30 years ago to write about cannabis and teach about it, which is why, in a way, being here today is a dream come true. I've written this book about the history and uses of cannabis. The complete book is online on the Cannabis Digest. You can read it all there for free. I don't have any books left for sale, honestly. I'm going to try to do another printing of it. But it's 13 years old. I guess 14 now. Anyhow, so I moved here. We had a club on campus. It was the largest club on campus for a long time. Used to have a weekly 420 in the middle of the quad and do all sorts of conferences and conventions and stuff like that. I brought a lot of my history so you can read a lot of these things. I'll talk more about it in the second half. But certainly, we weren't the only ones doing activism. Over in Vancouver, they held annual 420 protests that eventually moved down to Sunset Beach. They had one, I think it was well over 100,000 people, the last one, with some, really big names on the stage. I can never go. I always organize the one here in Victoria, so I never got to go see that. And certainly, across Canada, 420 became a big thing. But the protests were far beyond those big annual events. The protests were really on the street, and in large part, the work that Owen and I have done is a part of that. And so, where am I? I guess I'm going to get into it more in the second part here. But one of the implications of our court case as it developed in 2012 was when we won our first lower court decision. And it created what lawyers and judges like to call a lacuna, which is a gap in law, where the courts recognized that Health Canada's programs are inadequate because they didn't allow for edible cannabis. And so that was used as justification for not only us defying the law, but other compassion clubs and pretty much everybody else that wanted to use medical marijuana. It was pretty clear that it was absurd that smoking cannabis was the only legal route. And so we not only had support from our city council in Vancouver, but the city council Victoria, the city council of Vancouver cited our court case as justification for rezoning illegal cannabis stores as medical stores. And this was while Stephen Harper and the Conservatives government was raging on. But the city of Vancouver came up with a complete system of their own to license and regulate illegal medical cannabis stores because they recognized that Health Canada's medical marijuana program was so inherently flawed that people needed an alternative to it. And if that had to be 100 stores all across Vancouver, well, then so be it. And that's what it was. We had like 30 in Nanaimo. There's like 50 here in Victoria. They were just at their height. There were stores, illegal stores, under the Conservative government popping up across the country, with the exception of Alberta. Nobody there could get away with that. The Conservative government wouldn't put up with that for a minute. So there were some pockets where the police still held control. But certainly, Toronto, Ontario, the East Coast even was starting to see, large numbers of illegal storefronts. So when the Liberals took over in government in 2015, one of their campaign promises was legalization of cannabis. But it was really to just take the industry as it existed and try to switch it over into a legal one. It had nothing to do with the human rights of it, had nothing to do with it being used as medicine. It had everything to do with them taking over the economy that had been built up by, illegal operators before that. And so when they made it legal, they did everything they could to stop people from transitioning while they were telling everybody that they're helping people to transition. And so it's been very frustrating, particularly for small-scale growers that have tried to transition into the legal system. Many of them have gone bankrupt in trying to do that. And on the other hand, the government really catered to large businesses, large corporations with massive grow ops. They figured that would just be easier for them to manage than hundreds or thousands of smaller ones. But in a lot of ways, that turned out to be completely inaccurate. And most of the large companies that started out have significantly changed their operations. Owen, in fact, at one point went and worked for Aurora, the one company. You can see this. This was the world's largest grow house at one certain point. Just absolutely massive, everything automated. And if it wasn't automated, it was immigrant workers that were doing the work. That's gone bankrupt. So now they grow flowers there, I think, because that's that's not how cannabis is meant to be grown. Certainly not as medicine. A lot of companies and a lot of people really hyper evaluated or overestimated the value of their companies in order to sell the shares at more than they should have been. And there was literally like billions of dollars kind of milked out of people that bought shares at high prices thinking that these companies were going to be worth a lot. And in many cases, these companies have never will turn a profit. There's been a real glut in the legal industry. It's gone down a bit now, but for a time there, the legal producers were producing 10 times more than were being sold in the legal stores. And that's for a few reasons. One, a lot of medical users that use this every day can't afford the prices and the taxes and things that are in the legal system. Recreational users that just purchase once in a while, it's not such a big deal. But if you're purchasing, $20, $30 worth of this a day, the extra taxes are quite a burden. And the black market, obviously doesn't necessarily have that. We do pay our taxes, but not all of them because they're pretty extraordinary. So legalization has had a really interesting impact. A lot of the smaller producers that got into the market and have struggled to make money have actually transitioned into the international markets because Canada has now established itself as kind of a leader in cannabis around the world. And so there's a lot of European countries, for example, that like Germany, that don't have an established supply and distribution network. And so we've been able to send a lot of cannabis to other countries, which has actually helped keep, many of the companies in Canada afloat because the domestic market just isn't big enough for the amount that's being grown here. But that'll change when the United States switches course at some point and starts to grow legally. There's going to be, and even